Welcome to Books in the Freezer, a podcast dedicated to the deliciously disturbing world of horror fiction. I'm your host, Stephanie, and today I am joined by author Bethany C. Morrow to talk about her latest book, Cherish Farrah. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Stephanie.
I am so excited to have you here because I read this book. I got it as an ARC in December, and it's a book that I just need to talk to other people about. Like I remember I read it and I'm like, so what do we all think, guys? And where is everyone? I need to know.
Where's the support group? Who's talking about it?
I know I'm like I have a lot of feelings and thoughts I need to process, and I'm like looking through Goodreads like, okay, I'll sit with these for 2 more months, I guess. So, for listeners who are not aware, can you tell us a little bit about Cherish Farrah?
Yes, I will tell you the story that you think you're reading before you know the story. So Cherish Farrah is about, well, it's from the perspective, it's from the POV of a 17-year-old girl named Farrah, who, in her own words, is cosplaying a teenage girl. So it should become pretty obvious pretty quickly that she has a budding psychopathy and is not a normal person, period, but is not a normal teenage girl. And she is one of two Black girls in a very white country club community, the other of whom is her best friend Cherish, but Cherish is a transracial adoptee. And so she's being raised by white parents who are very progressive and very aware, socially aware. And they have been mindful of the just the different needs that that Cherish would have as a Black girl. So like they have a Black pediatrician, she has a Black orthodontist. They're aware of and acknowledging of things like medical racism and all the different onslaughts, all the different attacks that Black women experience in our society. And they've sort of tried to set up, a world where those things don't harm Cherish. But because they're a white, extremely affluent family, they also have raised her with a level of privilege that is not meant for Black girls. It's completely divorced from an awareness and understanding, honestly, of what it is actually to be Black in the United States, which is more about how society treats you than anything else. And so she has this kind of like incompetence and sort of void in her that Farrah, the only other Black girl in the community, can see. And because of the type of person that Farrah is, it's also something that she knows immediately she uniquely can fill, and that can make Cherish hers. And so they have a very actually sort of typical teenage girl relationship in terms of the level of intimacy and the level of toxicity potentially. And someone today actually described it as a cruel type of intimacy. It's very needing of constant affirmation and constant proving, and you just always have to sort of like re-up this commitment of loyalty and that we are the most important people in each other's lives, even though it doesn't seem to be under attack by anyone in their lives. Like everyone seems to grasp that they are the most important people to each other, but they, within this dynamic, they just have this this need to constantly be reaffirming it and constantly just re-upping their commitment to it.
I loved that aspect. This like toxic female friendship that is very much its own thing, but seemed like so relatable. You have that friend you just like live over at their house, and like their parents are essentially your parents at this point, and the like enmeshment that goes on just so many levels. I really liked, and it is the one of the central parts of the novel. So it
was but it's interesting because when you look at what happens in this book and how troubling this particular dynamic is, I think a lot of people will sort of color outside the line and attribute a lot of it to this type of relationship. And what I'm trying to say is like, no, this type of relationship is very common, particularly when you think about how we treat teenage girls. It's not shocking that, when you're speaking as someone who was a teenage girl, when the world is constantly like diminishing and just overlooking any of what you go through, what your needs are. There's no sort of like valuation of your lived experience or anything. You're constantly being, and if teenage girls like something, forget it. That thing is just completely a joke.
Oh my
And
gosh.
you know, so of course, in a world and a time where you're the only people who value each other properly, of course you would have these very intense, like you said, this enmeshing, this like almost refusal to not be fused together. Everybody, even if you didn't have that friend in high school or junior high, as far as what I could see, when girls didn't have that person, they were very envious of those friendships. Everybody wanted to belong in a really intense, committed relationship like that. And that's why I think it's funny that we show so much about romantic love in high school and junior high, because I'm like, that's not the most interesting relationship happening right now.
No, absolutely not. I would like to think we're getting a bit more of like, here's the story about like my best girlfriend, things like Pen 15 and stuff like that.
Absolutely. I want, as usual, when you have a lack of representation, the first representation always has to be perfect, like always has to be edifying, always has to be healthy, always has to
Oh yeah.
correct toward. And I'm like, that's not it. That's
Above
not that's
reproach,
not
yeah.
that's not the relationship I'm talking about. Cherish Farrah is the relationship I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, I love what you said, yeah, about being a teenage girl and like what a tough spot that is. And I mean, that also kind of paired with who Farah is, I think also kind of lends her like her need for control.
Her need for control is just her psychopathy, and if anything, she plays on the expectation and the limited understanding of teenage girls that the majority of society has. It shouldn't be so easy for her to fake it. I'll put it that way. Given the kind of person she actually is, should not be so easy. But if people are always underestimating this demographic, and you're never taking them seriously, like you might even miss a psychopath. Like you might not notice that she is acting. She is not the same as Cherish.
She was such a fascinating character. And for it to be, our, first person POV character was such an interesting reading experience. So how was it like writing that?
Oh gosh, it was very claustrophobic because you can't get away from her and tell the story. Um, and it's not, I would say, more than claustrophobic. It's honestly exhausting because she's always, even if, I won't say if this ever actually happens in the story, but even if there were no ulterior motives, even if there were no chess game being played, she would not know that. She would not believe that. She's
Okay.
always turning every situation over 17 times, looking for cracks, looking for motives, so that's all the time, every interaction, no matter who it is, could be her own mother, that she's always doing that. So you have to really go with her in that. You have to approach the world the same way she does. You don't have to see the world the same way she does, but to write her, you have to approach the world the same way she does. So it's exhausting.
I mean, yeah, as exhausting as I imagine it is to be her, like we get in the early chapters how she kind of uses uh Cherish as this gauge to like what is normal, how am I supposed to act? Oh, she's doing that? Okay.
Cherish is the canary. So I will just, and that's why she's so valuable to Farah, is because she's not just the canary, but that's a big part of it. But it's also, like I said, that she has this Farah shaped hole uniquely because of the way she's been raised, because of this society that we're in. And there's no surviving without Farah.
Yeah. Another thing I liked was kind of when Farrah has to deal with the realities of privilege. Like you said, they're both in this like private school, but in the book, like Farrah's family like loses everything in this very public way. And in the book, she says, you know, like other people had like quote unquote lost everything, but they had other things to fall back on. And like now I'm realizing like when we lost everything, everything is everything.
Everything is everything. When other people, when people with institutional generational wealth lose everything, they mean their luxuries. It doesn't mean homes. Home can't be lost. It doesn't mean, it's there's always something to move into that, and whether it's embarrassing is different from actually losing everything. There are tiers to things. And for a Black American family in the country and the world as it literally exists, work has been done and constantly mediated to make sure that there is no accruing of generational wealth. And so it's really easy to kind of isolate affluent Black people also, because you realize that like you don't have a community in this space. If you lose, you lose. And
Yeah.
for a lot of the time, one of the reasons that you can't accrue, let's say, equity is because you're responsible for other family members, extended family, in a way that white Americans don't have to be, because they can all accrue generational wealth, right? So coming face to face with the fact that there's no platform from which you can't fall all the way back down is like, oh, it's built this way for a reason. Like, this is intentional. You intentionally only gave me as much as you could take back. And that doesn't work for Farrah.
No. Well, yeah, I kind of love the whole idea that she's, you know, very much getting on her parents like, well, what are you doing to get us back into this house? Like, what is our game plan here,
Well, and
family?
that's all about, she doesn't care. Like her mom tells us, she didn't love the house. She always, she wants what she wants. She loves it now because it was hers, and you don't get to take things from her. So she's asking these like totally irrational demands. And with she has a complete lack of empathy. So with no concern for, well, if you feel this destabilized, is it possible that your parents also feel destabilized? But her next thought is, what do I get? What am I in control of now? How do I get control back? And that's all that matters to her. So it doesn't matter how it makes her parents feel. It doesn't matter and that's not being an entitled, spoiled person. That's something's wrong with this person. Like, she does not, because these are ostensibly the closest relationships you have. And she's completely incapable of seeing and believing and caring, I guess, about how situations are impacting anybody but her, because she's not concerned.
She was just, I'm telling you, just so interesting. Like I highlighted so much. Like you are.
I love her. I mean, she is probably like my favorite, because she's so uncompromising.
Mm-hmm.
It's it is, whether you like it or not, it's very easy to understand her worldview and her logic, because it's very consistent.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna. Yeah, extremely consistent. I also liked, speaking of the mothers, kind of Brienne and Nicole, and Brienne being Cherish's adopted mother, and Nicole, like, I think even in this space where Nicole loses everything, she can't go to Brienne. Like, she's also not there supporting her in a way, and in a way, she's kind of parroting this rhetoric. Like, yeah, like I see it with Black families. They lose this generational wealth, and she like knows the problem, but isn't there to be a support system for her.
Well, because what do you do how good and progressive can you be while you're actively benefiting
Mm-hmm.
from the same system that is doing this? And the way that you're benefiting is literally because of what is denied me. That's the actual reality. So, not desiring to dismantle your own privilege, there's only so much you can offer someone, right? And it's going to sound
Mm-hmm.
very fake, and it's going to sound very it's gonna sound very trite because you are literally profiting from the system that is doing this to me, and I'm supposed to give you credit because you see it.
Mm-hmm. I've seen it compared to, Jordan Peele's Get Out, and I do see in that, like, progressive, white liberalism only goes so far. Like, we need to go a little deeper than
Well,
that.
really, I think what both Get Out and Cherish Farrah talk about, because they are both social horror, of course. They both have the similar, and I can't obviously tell you why they're similar without ruining things. But the thing is, it's to tell you the evil of white liberal progressivism. It's not to say it's not going far enough. It's to tell you that it's sinister. There's nothing but eradication. There's nothing but dismantling the system that would prove you get it. So like all of these sort of surface, it's like Brienne cornrowing her daughter's hair and having taken a class to learn to do that. And still everything else that you come to find is true in the story, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's very much and obviously if you're familiar with any of my other work, if you're familiar with A Song Below Water, again, um, it's very, very apparent that this progressive city, it's because it's based in Portland, Oregon, and it's both the most like progressive city, but it's also like the whitest city. So how are what do you think these two things mean, that these two things can both be
Yeah.
true? And why is this supposed to make me feel better when I can see how complicit and sometimes actively engaged in my terrorization this is? So it very much is an indictment of this progressiveness, because it's fake.
Yeah. You're right. I did have, since we're running out of time, I had a question from a Patreon supporter, Jocelyn, who wanted to know what your inspiration was for the story.
I can't tell you because it's
Okay.
the twist. Like that's where that's where
Yeah.
it started, was the twist. So I know, I get that. I
Intriguing.
do. I get that question. I get that question, and I'm like, I wish I could tell you, but it would spoil it for
Yeah, it would
everyone else.
ruin
Yeah, I
everything. And
know.
you really have to go into it not knowing the twist. A tradition we have on the podcast is to ask, what is a chilling obsession or something in horror or horror adjacency that you've been enjoying in pop culture lately?
So I don't know what it's considered, actually. I know that it's based on a novel, and I haven't read the novel. And I actually had to slow down in watching the show because it did get more just uncomfortable, actually, just the disquiet that it creates. But I was watching Station 11, and I'm not finished with it, but the first episode to me was so powerful because it did something that I just absolutely love. And then, of course, it's totally different for the rest of the episodes. But the first episode is the moment before and then the moment of the world ending, basically, when you don't know that that's going to happen. And it looks startlingly familiar. And so and we're living through a pandemic. So you're going through that phenomenon of watching, something's wrong, but you can't tell something's wrong. Like, I know something's wrong. I don't feel right. And I know factually, I know these things are happening, but the world outside my window looks exactly the same. So it's that, I mean, that's devastating. That creates like this, usually like something like ennui in people who I can't reconcile the familiarity of the situation with the gravity of the situation. And it focused really closely on character. And it was just, I've watched that first episode so many times, even though I haven't finished the series, because it's just, I think it's so brilliantly done. It's so good. It's so, so good. Um, but we'll see if I can finish it anytime soon.
I finished it a few days ago. It is very emotional. Like, I cried watching it quite a few times. It's beautiful, beautiful but heavy.
Yeah.
So I love that. Station 11. Also like the book. It's a bit different, but I'd
I
say
like that
mostly.
about adaptations. Adaptations
Mm-hmm.
are supposed to be different.
I think I'm a little lenient on that. And I do like the way it's going, and I think they've for the better, and they've kind of tapped into a different thing with the changes. So I'm here for that. Well, the other tradition we have here on the show is to ask all of our guests what their final girl song would be.
So I actually have an answer for this, and you will have to forgive me if I don't say this person's name right because I wasn't familiar with them before this album, but Halsey,
Halsey.
so they did an album with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. And I mean, those are the magic words. If you tell me that Trent Reznor was a part of something, I will go to it. And so the song from that album would be "I Am Not a Woman, I'm a God." That would be my final girl song. It's pretty dope, and it's I don't know who they are. I don't know what their music is usually like, but all I hear is Trent Reznor, and that makes me happy. So.
Love that. Well, I'll definitely add that to the playlist. Yeah. So, like, what's going on in the movie when that's happening?
Oh my goodness. So there's too many options, but it's definitely you could definitely make a case for walking away from an explosion with that song, absolutely, and just being just completely uninvested in the explosion behind you.
Love that energy. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Where can people find you online?
You can find me, unsurprisingly, you can find me on Twitter. And it's the same handle for Instagram, but I always warn people, like, if I mean, the me that you heard talking in the way that I'm just like myself is actually on Twitter. So it's at BC Morrow, which is BCMORROW. And then I also have a website, BethanyCMorrow.com, which is just an easy place to look at my book covers and click them and buy them. Um, and yeah, that's the easiest and most reliable place is honestly Twitter.
Like I said again, thank you so much for coming on. And for listeners, Cherish Farrah is available now. So go out and get it. Books in the Freezer is a bi-weekly podcast. We post episodes every other Tuesday. You can find us on Twitter at BooksFreezerPod or on Instagram at Books in the Freezer. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/booksinthefreezer, or you can send us an email at booksinthefreezer@gmail.com. And we are also on TikTok at Books in the Freezer. I know the episode is a little on the shorter side this week. I still think we had some really good conversations. And yeah, Bethany had like another interview lined up like immediately after she was done with this one. So I did not want her to be late for that. But like I said, I still think we managed to have some good conversations. If you are new here, I would say usual episodes are not author interviews, though I do like to do author interviews here and there. The usual setup for an episode is that a guest and I will recommend horror books within a category or subgenre and rate them on a scariness scale, I would say is the usual setup. And then we have kind of different fun other themed episodes along the way. But if you listened and you would like to support the podcast, there are a few ways to do that. One of them is to become a Patreon supporter on patreon.com at patreon.com/booksinthefreezer. There's a $1, $3, and a $5 level, all kinds of perks like new episodes, Foxer group chats, movie nights. We just did one. We watched The Taking of Deborah Logan, which if you haven't seen it is an experience. It is a movie. In a good way. I feel like I say that when I'm like, I don't know how to feel about it. I genuinely like it, but it is a wild ride. I do love found footage, so I think I was just primed to enjoy it. Anyway, getting real sidetracked on that. So we do those. There's also like bonus episodes, and Patreon just released an option to do like annual support, so you can do like a one-time payment to support for the whole year, and I think you do get a discount on that if you decide to do like a one-time annual payment versus monthly payments. So if that sounds interesting to you at all, you can go to patreon.com/booksinthefreezer. There's also an Amazon link that is in the show notes that takes you to Amazon. You just do whatever normal shopping you would normally do. And a small percentage of that goes to help the podcast. If you're thinking that you would like to show your support for the show, but without spending any money, you can totally do that. There's a lot of ways to do that. Honestly, just talking about the show, posting about it on social media is a big help to small indie shows like this one. Like, we mainly grow by word of mouth. Word of mouth is our big tool to help us grow. So just know, anytime you post about it or tell a friend about us, it's huge. And also leaving reviews. Leaving a review on a site like Apple Podcasts or like Spotify has recently opened up like a ratings and review feature that lets you give a star rating to podcasts. So either of those, big helps. I'm Stephanie. You can find me on Twitter at lady_gagnon. That's LADY_GAGNON. Or on Instagram at That's What She Read. And that is That's with 2 A's. So thank you for listening, and see you next time on Books in the Freezer.